Welcome everyone to the HERICOM seminar series. Today we have Dr. Marco Bardus presenting. He is an assistant professor in public health at the Department of Applied Health Science at the University of Birmingham, and he specializes in health communication, and his research aims to understand how to effectively influence behaviors to prevent public health and environmental health issues. His research focused on developing, implementing, and evaluating public health interventions using a strategic social marketing framework. Before becoming a full-time academic, he worked as a PR professional for 10 years, and he occasionally still writes for newspapers, magazines, and other media outlets. And he also has experience training journalists in public health and science communication, as well as public health professionals in media training. Today's webinar will explore the strategic use of media relation in public health communication. So without further ado, please welcome the head of the NHR HERICOM network, Dr. Marco Bardus.
All right, thank you, Samira, for the introduction. Thank you all for attending today. So let's go straight to the point. I'd like to share with you some of my lived experience, let's say, as a journalist, as a freelance journalist, as a public relation professional. So from the other side of the barricade, if you want. So I thought about organizing this webinar into 4 parts, or given the question that you see in the screen here. So what are media relations first? We're going to talk about why should we bother dealing with journalists and media professionals. And then we're going to talk about why do we need a media relations strategy for whatever we do in public health, and how we can create then such a media strategy. So I'll give you some tips on how to do that. This is a gentle introduction to media relations, of course, because public relations per se is a discipline, is a study, a field of study, area of research as well. So this is to respond also to a request that we received through the network for more training about media relations. And it's probably just the tip of the iceberg if you want. So first of all, let's clarify a few things. So public relations in public health communication has a specific role. Public relations is an art and science of establishing and promoting a favorable relationship with the public. This is like a broad definition of public relations. And in this table, you see several functions of public health. So public relation functions in public health and healthcare. And today we're going to focus on media relations as an approach to interact with key journalists, bloggers, or other kind of influencers to diffuse, to promote information, to increase the reach of our programs, to engage different stakeholders, including also politicians and media, and other forms of organizations. So media relations is a profession, so someone can specialize in doing media relations, so working for an organization to engage with the media. And media relation describes the relationship that organizations have with other organizations and the press. So it's a function of public relations aimed to build and maintain, and I stress the point, build and maintain meaningful relationships. So media relations is a strategic communication tool for organizations. And this because we as organizations, let's put it this way, we can reach out to the publics that we interact with different ways. So we can pay for communication. So it's basically advertising, so paid media. We can do PR, public relations and publicity. We can do events, and so that journalists can talk about the events. This will be called earned media coverage. We can share media coverage by promoting our activities on social media. This is what we do as public health organizations. As a network, we advertise our programs, we advertise on webinars or activities on LinkedIn, on Twitter or X. And so this is what we do. Owned media is what we produce as organizations internally and necessarily within our communication channels. So if we have a website, we have specific activities, webinars like this. So this is our own media. This is a model called the PESO model of communication. Let's go down to the question is, why should we deal with journalists, or why should we bother dealing with journalists? Well, there are several reasons, of course. I would start from a theoretical explanation, if you want. I'm an academic, of course, probably boring in this case, but I try to go back to theory. So why do we care? Why should we care? Well, there's plenty of research on media effects since the 50s and probably even earlier of the previous century, of course, where there's so evidence, so research shows that media can shape public perception and public opinion. I don't think we need to think of older examples of propaganda to understand that. So whatever we see online, on social media, on print media, in the radio, influences our perception about an issue. It could be health, could be anything else. Could be about politics, could be about environment, and so on. So there is a lot of research about media effects and media framing as public health issue, and as a way to influence public opinion and perception about the same thing. So the paper that I mentioned here below talks about public estimates of cancer frequency. So if you ask people, what do you think the prevalence of this cancer is? I mean, how many people are affected by a specific cancer? They will tell you, well, it's a lot more than actually it is, because people do not understand much statistics. They do not know where to get the sources of information. So they get it from the information that comes to them now on social media, or they look actively for, on newspapers, on radio, on other channels. So there's a distortion, there's this gap between what people think an issue is and what the actual issue is based on the statistics. And this paper talks about that. So quite outdated, but I think it's still, I would say, relevant to other issues when you talk about misinformation, disinformation about vaccination, about smoking prevalence, about specific disease prevalence, and so on. So in terms of agenda setting, so this is another theory within the context of organizational communication and public communication. So we have our, when we say ours, probably is the researchers, the public health professionals have their agenda. Of course, they want to improve people's health. They want to do social good, and so on. And so in a sense, we want to push our agenda towards the media, and this will be then informing public agenda, so public professionals, local authorities, or government, and then policy this way, at the government level, national level. And of course, the personal experience, interpersonal communication comes into play in this context. And the media play a role in disseminating this information from the gatekeepers where we are, let's say, where we produce knowledge, research, information, and so on. So media has a role as a gatekeeper, as a mediator of what we do, what we produce, what we want to achieve also with the public and decision makers later on. So why is it important? Well, an optimal media representation from an organization, a public health organization, can foster credibility and trust, which has a reputational value. So if we make a mistake as an organization, as a NHS trust, there's a big problem, because people will not believe what we do, what we say. As researchers, if we do not communicate well our results, we lack an important aspect of impact, from a societal point of view, from an economic standpoint, from a communicational standpoint. Yeah. So what do we need a media relation strategy? Why is that important? It has a strategic importance to build a relationship with journalists, because reputation is something you build over time. So there are 4 key elements of a successful media relation strategy. First, you probably need to have a research mindset, and we're probably relatively easy for research institutions, not for everyone, but it might be relatively easier. You need to be curious like a journalist, and probably it would be helpful if you knew some journalists so that you can understand their way of thinking, how they process information, how they develop information and how they develop the news. Be creative and think outside the box. This is another way. So think about ways you can engage with the journalist, meaning reach out, discuss something, and share some common interests, perhaps. And the last point is to be proactive. So it's not a reactive activity. So we need to, that's why it is a strategic activity. It's a planned exercise that we need to think about. Being proactive is probably the hardest part for people that are very busy, I'd say, but that's why we probably need to have someone who has that expertise within your team that can take care of this specific relationship with the media. So how can we create a media relations strategy? So in the next 10 minutes or so, probably a bit more, I'm going to guide you through some of the lessons that I learned, that is by doing probably some of them into developing a strategy. So number one, of course, is think strategically. So you think about setting goals, defining objectives, SMART objectives, so specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound, and so on. Probably this is an acronym that is somehow familiar to most of you. Then build a network. And this is probably the thing that takes a bit more time, a bit more effort. A network of colleagues, network of media professionals, and specifically for the topic that you're interested in, or the area that you're interested in health, in healthcare, in public health. So the network here is the key, because this is where you would disseminate your information. It's it's not just a contact list. It's a contact list of people that are sharing some interest with you. A journalist that writes about the topic or the issue, the area that you are covering, that you're specialized in, or that talk about health in general. So you need to identify these people and build this network. Then get the story picked up. That's easier said than done, of course. Then you get coverage, and then you work and respond to the press, because you disseminate information as a press release, as a blog post, or as a specific contact email with a journalist. And then they might pick it up. They might call you back and they say, I want to know a bit more about this project. I want to know more about what you found. And then you need to respond to the press. Now, after all of this, you happen to be able to measure the result. And so to see how much your efforts have generated reach, visualizations, clicks, and hopefully some publications, so some articles, some newspaper articles, or podcasts, YouTube videos, or whatever you are interested in evaluating. So let's take a look at step by step how to build a media relation strategy. So establishing the foundation of your communication, establishing your messaging, and then modeling the strategy. So establishing the foundation of your communication is really much setting up the stage. So when you have a research project, probably think about what is the desired output and the impact you want to achieve. So again, we talk about impact in different ways, of course, in research, but it could be what is the overall aim of this project? Of course, when the project is completed, you can say, this is what we achieved, this is what we obtained, this is what we wanted to do, and this is what we produced and what we achieved. That is, per se doesn't guarantee the newsworthiness of the project. So you have to think carefully about what you want to tell. What's the story behind it? And I'll come back to the storytelling in a minute. So what is the overall story you're trying to tell? And what are the key messages or the key take-home messages you want to have from a project or from an activity? This will help you establish your messaging. So what are the key aspects you want to highlight? Then you model your strategy. Say, okay, I need to go out with these 3 key messages with The Guardian, for example. Then I want to go with another message for a local newspaper or a local news outlet. Or I can go to a podcast. Last week we had Nas and Money. He has a podcast that talks about power, money, and health. Maybe some of our results could go into that kind of venue. So it's a podcast by researchers for researchers, but it has a wider audience. So think about where you want to go, to whom you want to talk to. It could be a national newspaper, it could be a radio, it could be an international newspaper, it could be that has a global coverage, you know, CNN, BBC, those kind of outlets, Al Jazeera, whatever you think. Based on this, I say, okay, now I have messages. Now I need to know how to reach there. And this is where you start building the network. Now, bear in mind, building the network can start earlier on. So having a list of press contacts is important, but it's just not just a list. These are the people that are writing. Probably you need to have in your spreadsheet, if you want, a column explaining what are they writing about, what topics do they cover, where do they cover? Is it online? Is it in print? Is it both? Now, there's a bit, I would say, there's no distinction anymore between online, digital, and press. And so because journalists tend to be multi-modal, so they produce pieces for TV, for radio, for podcasts, for print and digital. So it's everything a bit more mixed now. You think about where is which journal, sorry, which newspaper, which media outlet, let's say, I want to reach. So you think about the end publisher, let's say, from this point of view. So once you have the list, you know what these journalists are writing about, you can start contacting them, saying, look, I have something that you might be interested in. Possibly on a one-to-one basis. From a pragmatic perspective, you can do this as a mail merge. You have the name, so personalizing your messages might be helpful. And maybe if you have a generated element that could differentiate journalist from another might be better. But again, a personalized contact might be much, much better than just mailings. Dear journalist, I hope you're well. I think you might be interested in this project. We have just released this press release, blah, blah, and send. This might not work. So you're trying to build a relationship. So it's really probably, you need to consider what are the journalists interested in and start and say, hey, I've read about this article on this topic. I think I might have something that you might be interested in covering as a follow-up, or that is related to that article that you wrote. And I find particularly fascinating, and explain why, of course, not just trying to entice the journalist. So try to build this network, this collaboration, and sorry, not collaboration necessarily, but could be a contact and that be motivated by a valid reason. Then you can see what's happening. So to do that, to build this database of journalists, look at what they're covering, what they're publishing. You can find contact details. Mostly, I would say Google, LinkedIn, and for some reason, for many years at least, till the past 2 or 3, journalists were very active on Twitter, on X. I think there's been a global shift to other sources of social media for journalists, but tendentially, journalists tend to be on Twitter more than LinkedIn. There might be a shift in the next few years, given the climate, let's say, that is going on Twitter. X, I cannot call it X. So save this contact list with their profiles, with their email contacts, and so on an Excel sheet or a customer relationship management system. There are many software available out there if you want to really do it in a professional way. So you can keep track of contacts. Say, I sent an email on that day, I got a reply, I didn't get a reply, maybe I need to follow up next week, and so on. And that's why this is particularly it's a full-time job, I would say. So doing media relations is a full-time job. So it would be good if you have someone within your team that is specialized and is taking care of that task, because I would not have the time to do it on top of my other things like teaching, research, and administrative activities. So PIs, researchers might not have the time and skills to do so, but having someone, or you deciding to do this as part of your career progress, might be good. Segmentation of media contacts. This is an important element, and I'm going to go a bit faster on this aspect. So segmentation is an important concept in marketing. So segmentation meaning creating groups, meaningful groupings of individuals, in this case of media professionals, based on topics or areas that you decide. Think, oh, this person is interested in population health. This person is interested in diabetes, for example. They cover a lot about that. So if my project is within this domain, I can reach out to those journalists first, based on relevance, okay? Then, of course, connecting with them. You can invite them for meetings. You can invite them to events, probably in person if possible, because depending on where they live. You can invite the journalists to attend coffee sessions, virtual or in person. But also you need to understand when they're active. So understanding what is the news story process, and understanding how they really engage with the news process. If they're freelancers, they can work probably 24/7, but they have to submit their articles at a certain time. So there's a timeline within a day they need to respond to, or maybe they do submit for magazines once a month, maybe, or twice a month. So you need to know their timeline. So having this in mind and part of your database information is particularly important. And again, come up with stories. Think about how we can connect with as journalists because they wrote an article that is somehow related to your project. That would be great. This, of course, takes time. So building this network, this data list, this list of data, sorry, a contact takes a lot of time. And so you need to be ready to be out there and be proactively looking for more information. And so building this takes time. Then finally, you end up writing your story. So this is where you can decide whether to put as a press release. You can write as an endorsement. It could be an email just stating the points so that the journalist would pick them up. Press release is very much an article pre-formatted with specific templates if you want. So the journalists are familiar with that, but it's always better to reach out in a more informal way, I would say, unless you are an institution like the University of Birmingham. They submit press releases to journalists. Think about not only at the written part, and most likely journalists will pick up information that is also displayed in a different way, in different format. So infographics, visuals, and they like a lot segments of stories, possibly as a voice or audio video recordings, a YouTube video, something summarizing the project, the research that you have done. So in terms of press release, you have a structure like this, so with a headline, subheadline, introduction, some quotes, the body paragraphs where the more details are included, and then contact details of the person in charge. So if you are in charge of media relations, that would be your contact details, or if those are the contact for the person in charge. This is a digital press release structure, but it's working also for print. So for visual storytelling, you have a lot of information you can find, of course, photos and videos that you collected in events, profiles of the organizational leadership roles or project leadership roles of the offices, the venues or events, activities you've done. If you have public engagement activities, that would be great to include. And so showing people working, doing things like a campaign event or a publication announcement or something like this. So product, something tangible that you can show. It would be good to have a YouTube channel. So the SPHR has a YouTube channel where we promote a lot of things, including these webinars. Can think about hosting podcasts. Of course, you need to know what to say when you have a calendar of events, a calendar of activities and interviews planned for the entire season, if you want, of events. You can have live events, seminars, webinars, or things like this that you can also share with the journalists. Like a video archive of everything. And then finally, you have to pitch your story. So you go to the journalist saying, look, I have a story for you. It's in different formats, of course, but then saying probably an email can help reach out, or a message on social media, say, hey, I have something that might be interesting to you. I know that you cover this topic. I have something similar that you might be interested in looking at. And then, of course, be found. So make sure that you are you're being reached easily. If you have email address, phone numbers, and so on. So how journalists like to be contacted? So there are some newspapers and news outlets that indicate how to approach a journalist. So they have editorial guidelines. But before you do that, probably you need to make sure that the story is newsworthy. What you're trying to tell is valuable, is something that people are interested in. People, meaning journalists, are interested in. They write for an audience, so you might think about where you want to get this story out. So what are the magazines, the newspapers, the radio channels that you want to you want your story to be picked up? Communicate your phone number, because they might want to pick up the phone and talk to you directly. Maybe set up a Zoom meeting, a Teams meeting, whatever people like to use these days. So contact details are important, but do not send documents, and probably do not send PDFs, because these are generally filtered easily by spam filters. And if you have happened to work or see a newsroom, usually email inboxes are inundated with messages daily. So if we receive like 40 to 50 email per day as academics, my newsroom might receive 200, 300, if not more. So you'll be one of those messages. You need to be able to overcome that by reaching out to the journalists, and possibly freelancers, they need to publish to get their salary. They need to be, yeah, to be paid for the articles published. So they're looking for stories. So I think that's a key aspect. Think about them and see what they are interested in. Then you approach. And then, of course, you need to be found. So not only you reach out, you put your contact details in the communication, the media, in the email, in the social media posts. Of course, they know how to reach out to you. But if you're representing an organization, make sure that you have a website with a specific media space, which includes brand assets, so a logo for print, pictures, news archives, a press of coverage of topics that have been covered before, contact details for spokespeople is also important. So having everything in one place might be helpful. So not so that the journalists do not have to go through different websites to get the information that they need. Last point, I mean, from this set of things, how to work with and respond to the press. So you can decide to be a spokesperson, or you need to identify someone within your organization that can be the spokesperson. This not necessarily can be the project manager or the principal investigator if you're a research institution. They could be someone who's ready to answer the questions that might come, and can get ready to answer interviews, to go on TV, on radio, on whatever channel the journalist might propose, and preparing for crisis. Sometimes things happen and things might go south. So you need to be ready to react to a media crisis. You need to have someone who can jump in. Being a spokesperson is to be, so these are some do's and don'ts for being an effective, efficient spokesperson, and some don'ts, what to avoid. So know your audience, do not use jargon, show emotions, practice, make it perfect, anticipate questions and prepare answers, and follow key messages. Finally, bridge the conversation. So of course, God knows that knowing the audience, sorry, is essential. So you know who you're talking to. It's not just the journalist, it's about the readership, or the audience that the journalists have in mind. Of course, avoiding jargon, because this goes without saying. We need to be speaking in a plain English way if you want. Demonstrate some empathy, so show emotions. Of course, it's not just we are called professionals here. We need to show professionalism, of course, but it's also good to acknowledge that some people might have challenges speaking to a camera, in front of a camera. And so on. And of course, practicing, so rehearsing the interview might be good. If you can record it, better. If you cannot record, at least ask the journalist to share with you some questions ahead of time, so you can get ready, you can prepare. And then again, follow your key messages. So remember what the story I said before. What is the story? What is the main message? What are the key take-home messages you want the journalist to pick up? And then try to bridge the conversation with their interests and other projects they might have covered in the past. What to avoid? Of course, do not lie. It goes without saying. And don't say no comment, because that will be probably raising red flags in multiple ways. Don't take things personally. Sometimes questions might be perceived as personal, but remember, if you are the spokesperson, you're representing not yourself, but you're representing an organization, you are representing a team, a research team, or an institution. So they're not attacking you. They might question the project, the ideas behind it, not you personally. Of course, don't get angry, defensive. You can show emotion, of course, but not this kind of emotion, probably. They will not be, there actually would be an element for them to pick up and insist on asking more questions, more uh, yeah, more tedious questions, perhaps. Don't say off the record, because it means that why should you say something off the record when it's an interview? Of course, it has to be on the record all the time. Don't speculate making assumptions. You can say, this is something unclear. I need to go back to my team to see if it's possible, if the question is direct, of course. Don't argue with journalists or try to embarrass them. They are professionals. They do their job, so um, they're there to help, at the same time to be critical. They should be. That's their role. Should be their role. Don't repeat negative comments, not because it's bad in general, but because it tends to highlight some aspect that can be overcome in a different way, in a more proactive and more assertive way. Don't be too demanding, and don't blame others. Of course, if you have to blame someone, if something happened, if a crisis happened, don't say it's the other organization's fault. There've been some misunderstanding. So probably you don't have to be very, very specific on criticisms. I would say, generally speaking, avoiding them. It's not a good thing to see if someone criticizes somebody else, especially on interviews. A few pointers on preparing interviews. So find out who will be in the interview, who is the journalist. If not the person you contacted, then ask them who's going to be the interviewer. Agree on the subject beforehand, so nothing is left completely out of the blue. Set limits of time if necessary. Sometimes they say we have a 10 minutes break. Probably it's going to be less than that, usually probably 5 to 3 minutes for TV, radio also. Ask if there's somebody else been interviewed before or after you, if it matters at all. And make sure you know the goal of the interview. So what is the purpose of this interview? And of course, try to link it to the project you're leading or you are involved in. Now, a few notes on crisis management. Sometimes it might happen that you have to manage with a crisis. A patient in your hospital has died and because of the treatment, or you're running a randomized trial, and this is an unintended consequence they came across. And so this is something that you might need to be ready. Or, a public health communication campaign that had unintended consequences. People stopped buying some goods and destroyed a neighborhood because they were upset by the content of a specific campaign. You might imagine many things might happen. So this is something you need to prepare beforehand and train yourself and your staff to be prepared to do research, anticipate the crisis. So if you have a plan, you know what to respond to do, what to do in what situations. Sometimes it's good to have a protocol in a sense and to follow this and proactively looking at engaging with the journalists. Now, social media, just a few notes here, and then we can go to a close. Sometimes social media has a major role, of course, in managing online communications nowadays, not necessarily in crisis. You can, because this is your own media, you can decide what to say, how to say it. So having a plan in crisis to, so this is like in the toolbox when the crisis hits, this is the information we need to pull out immediately, and be probably precise, right. So do not share misinformation, and use the opportunity to communicate what you want to say. So to give the story, the version of facts that is coming from an authoritative source, which is the organization that is involved in this problem, this crisis. And then, of course, it's a way to be proactive, not react. Say we haven't published anything about this because we don't know what to say. That's the worst thing to do probably in a crisis. Finally, so excluding crisis in general, let's say that we have our project, we communicated, we have interviews, we have several activities with the podcasts, we have press releases that have been translated into news items. Then finally, we can look at the measuring the efforts, seeing is there any stories that were picked up in a right way, in a positive way? Is there a sentiment behind it? Are we sure we've been covered the right way? So we can then evaluate impact. We can look at PR output, so number of stories published, outtakes, the way the stories were received. So looking at the quality, is it positive or negative? Is it on the story or not? And we look at PR outcomes. This is how we consider the impact from the perspective of public relations. Now the question is, how do you define the impact? You define the impact. So there are different ways we can look at impact. So we can measure the visitors. We can look at the coverage that has been targeted, at links from different sources, number of citations, if you want, of a web page, of a story. You can put them a value on the media, so the so-called advertising equivalent value. So if you had to publish the same information on the same media outlet, for a newspaper, an online website, how much would that cost if it was advertised? That's a way to say, well, we had two, three articles published on the BBC journal, BBC home page, and that would have costed us £50,000 if we had to publish that as an advertisement. Same goes with Google ads or Facebook ads, something like this. So you could calculate how much would cost for promoting our story in social media or news media outlets, and say if we had this covered through a news article that was free. And of course, then you can also look at the leads, so number of clicks and links that a press mention has generated, maybe new visitors, maybe people that have expressed interest in your project, in people meaning other journalists or other people, just simply the general public. So that later this you can see in Google Analytics or Google Analytics or other analytics from the website that you have. And this will help you understand how well the story has been picked or how badly the story was picked. So I think this brings me to close. I think it took a bit more than usual for this. So I'll open up now for questions, for comments, from the audience. So I thought about giving a bit more guidance. It's not just talking about generic topics about media relations. This is about giving some guidance on what you could do today to organize your media relation strategy. Hope it helps. I'm really now open for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Marco, for this insightful talk. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. So I do have a question. So you mentioned trust in sources as like a very important thing, but how can we like maintain trust with the public, and what are the most effective way to do this through media communication, especially in an age of like misinformation and like
Disinformation.
messages from like various sources, like
Well, there are probably two ways of doing that. So if you just looking at the media relations side, so if you want to maintain a relationship with the news professional, consistency pays off. So you need to demonstrate constantly that you as organization or you as a person, you are reliable. So you're out there ready to answer the questions when you are, to be proactive. At the same time, try not to hide anything. I know sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes there are stories that cannot be disseminated, if you want, but this will contribute. So if you disseminated a story that is partially true, that would contribute to the misinformation. So you need to make sure that you're going out there with the right information. If you're dispelling a rumor, you say this is exactly what we're trying to do. So dispelling rumors, the first thing to do in also in crisis communication, crisis and risk communication. So as organization, you need to say this is what the facts are. This is what we know now. There might be developments in the future, but this is what we know. This is what we say. Um, you might. So I'm thinking now back um, to the COVID-19 pandemic. Things change and information change over time. And this created a problem of uncertainty within institutions, health institutions, healthcare professionals, and so on. But because the novelty of that disease generated uncertainty in general, so it was an uncertainty from the researchers, from scientists, to the public, which is okay, but they need to say that we are uncertain because of this, because this is a science in development. So if you say that, you acknowledge that there is a level of uncertainty. For now, this is what we know. This is what we should do. This guidance might change in the future, but this is what you should do now. Okay, so trust, it needs to be maintained. If you are not out there, if you're not expressing, if you're not saying what your organization knows, that's a problem, I think. People will not trust that. And a point to dispel the misconception and rumors. Of course, we cannot control whatever goes on social media,
Mm.
beyond the fact that we can report misinformation. So this is like citizens can do that. So we can tell people, if you see misinformation out there, report this as a spam or as a misleading. So we can incentivize this kind of behavior, or creating more critical media literacy among the public. But this is generally harder to achieve, and it's in the long run, in the long term, something we can consider as a society. It's not just our organization involved in a specific project. So think about, something controversial, food labeling, about smoking, gambling. These are the type of topics that have a backlog from public health perspective, some controversial aspect because of the industry influence. So if you can say something about that, you have to be careful what you say. But overall, you have to think about the organization that you're representing, saying this is what we know at the moment, and dot.
Yeah, on a similar note as well, like I feel like nowadays a lot of people don't read like full articles, and people only read the headlines, and social media only like adapts like research findings that are often like complex and very nuanced in like a few sentences. Like for example, I know when the carbon budget from the climate change committee was published, obviously it has a lot of information, but the news media just said to achieve net zero, everybody needs to eat like three kebabs less in a year or something. Like, how can we like adapt our research and to make it like disseminated to more people, but also um keeping the nuance of it in like a shorter format.
Hmm. Well, I would speak to the journalists themselves, so I will engage with them before, not just at the end of the process. The risk is that they might oversimplify things, as you said. So if they were involved from the beginning, saying, look, we're doing this project on climate change, we're trying to understand what are the motivators and how people can contribute, individuals can contribute to reducing emissions, this is what we would achieve. However, you can say, look, this is only one element, but we need to acknowledge that there are more, um, there are environmental factors that contribute to that, meaning there are organizations, there are countries that pollute, or something like that. So it's not just the individual. So don't blame the citizens for troubles that come from companies and corporations, for instance. So try to build this kind of connection with the journalists to say, to make them think it's not just the readers, it's not just the individuals who contribute to the society that play a role. So in a sense, it's about convincing. It's an act of like an overt conversation, of course, with the journalist to probably would help. Be transparent and saying, look, frankly, um, it doesn't. This is a complex issue. It's not to simplify things. I know the journalists want to simplify things, but sometimes you need to find the right way to do so. So maybe we can engage in a conversation before you publish that article. And you need to think about what the journalists want. The journalists want to for their news items to be read, listened to, diffused, and for newspapers to be sold, even though now the model of business is a bit changing. So it's about advertising, not anymore as a copy sold. But the same clicks count a lot today. So if you want my page to be seen by clicked and read and visualized, you need to attract the audience somehow. So they try to have sensationalistic headlines, and that might mislead information, of course. Um, so the point is for me to say engage in conversations earlier on, try to bring them on your side with rationale, of course, of uh, being partners in this conversation. It's not just I give you the information I want, when I need it. Maybe long answer to your question, but
No, that's fine. Are there any other questions from the audience?
not. I have questions for the audience. I would say, would you like to have more detailed training on this? Is there something that might be important for the network? We can open up for other training sessions, specific training sessions online. Happy to do so. Happy to design something like that if this is helpful, of course.
Yeah, I actually think it would be very helpful. I just had a meeting with the ResNet committee yesterday, and we're planning the uh, annual like ResNet meeting before the ASM,
Mhm.
and we're focusing a lot of like on communication and the topic of media training and communication in like social media and like communicating our research to the media always comes up. So if you're happy, I can like
Mhm.
suggest for you to provide some training for the next ResNet day. I think that would be great.
Happy to do so. Let's talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll let them know.
Is anyone in the virtual room here engaged in a journalist or is a journalist?
No.
No one. Interested in becoming? They pay well. Depends on the outlet, of course. Yeah. Depends on. Oh, Mark.
It's hard. It's hard not to speak up when you you calling me directly. But yeah, I would. I think you already know, Marco, that and nice to meet everyone else on the call. That I was once a journalist, so I really enjoyed your session. Thank you. Going back to what you said before, I think our members in Fuse, because I'm the Fuse communications manager, but I think our members, academics in Fuse, and wider, will be really interested in more in-depth training on this. It's something that's come up before. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one thing that occurs to me from still being in touch with many of my journalistic friends is that the newsroom isn't once what it was. So there's a lot less people there. So the relationships you build up are really important, but also it's difficult because there's less and less people on the ground, so to speak, in these newsrooms to engage with. They've gone into PR roles or other roles, and yeah, that's something that's definitely different from a few years ago when,
Mm,
particularly regionally,
mhm,
there's less and less journalists on the ground. I don't know if you've got any experience with that as well.
mhm. Yeah, well, I got a few contacts more with in my local newspaper when I was in Italy. As you said, yes, some journalists moved on to more probably stable roles so working as PR agents for specific organizations, local authorities. this, because the market is changing, of course, I mentioned before that the way journalists are working now probably is more on a freelance basis. So they work for different outlets because the outlets have made people redundant, so they close down. Because the way probably social media has dragged a lot of attention, and there's also we need to mention this generative AI content out there. So not looking at deep fake content, but I'm talking about generated content so chatbots generate a lot of information, misinformation sometimes. So they are substituting probably some of the basic journalist activities. I'm not saying the whole profession is at risk, but it has changed, of course. So probably not having relationship with the institution, but with the person that is a PR professional or a journalist, it will be important to know. So to maintain that relationship in the long term, and probably monitoring, looking at this changing environment, media environment is important. So do not rely on necessarily on social media, because social media, some platforms might die, might disappear, might change, like what happened with Twitter, with X. So if your media strategy depends entirely on social media and on Twitter, that you'll be better selling off potatoes in the local market or any other goods.
Thanks, Marco. That was great.
Thank you for your contribution. Maybe you can think about doing something for the SPHR, right? So some training, we can put together our brains.
Yeah, absolutely. That way, we should, definitely meet after this call. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have a comment in the chat from Ellen Foster saying she's working in PR and communication for disease awareness for pharma. And she says, thank you for this talk, very insightful. Would love to learn more from the team in the future and applications to public health.
Yeah, I would say the point of view from the pharmaceutical companies, of course, the interest is something different. But I would say we share, in this case, some common goals, and probably in improving people's lives, whether it's through pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical interventions. Let's put it this way. The skills are the same. The approach might be different, of course, because the organizational goals are different. But I think it's the moment you are transparent, the moment you are interested in engaging in meaningful conversations with journalists, freelancers, or working for specific outlets, I think that's clear. I think Ellen, in your role, Ellen, in your role, this is what you need to do daily, basically, building a relationship with different journalists to promote what you are doing as an organization, as a pharmaceutical company. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending and participating. We got the next webinar coming up on the 19th of November. It's about sport and public health, exploring the ability for sport to be both a force for public health, but also a damage to our health, by Robin Ireland. And I've posted the registration link in the chat. And there's also the link to the other seminar series and the link to our YouTube channel where you can watch previous webinars, and the link to the Hericom network if you want to join.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Samira, for chairing the session.